So good afternoon. Getting some updates on this Derek Chauvin case with the George Floyd murder. It's going to be interesting. The 911 operator said that she thought the screen had frozen because they had him down for so long, which is kind of scary, but just a pretty. It's amazing when you have these cases that you have these national things that so many people are fixated on, and then we get to a point where some time goes by, it cools down, and then you have the trial, and it just comes back up to the national consciousness. So I don't see how, based on what I saw, he walks on this one. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. But good afternoon. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Yes, on Thursday, I could not go live. I had a nightmare with Comcast. They ended up coming Friday morning and fixing everything. So I apologize for that, but we're back live now, and I want to thank you for all the messages and the comments that have come in over the weekend. I hope you got a chance to get outside. It's beautiful out. Yesterday was kind of the laziest day you can possibly have, but today's very nice, and I think we're getting past winter, and it's nice to see this. Brantford is a great town. I know not everybody's watching from Brantford, but it's a great town to go through this time of year with. So over the weekend, I think Thursday, we got a press release, and I never published it. We talk about the stuff here. So we'll start with affordable housing. A press release that the state, CHAFA, had awarded Beacon and the Brantford Housing Authority money for a project called Parkside in Indian Neck. And so they have approval to take down a current facility, which is 3 or 4 buildings that'll be coming down. That's 50 units, and replacing it with a 67-unit single building, 3 stories, 3.5 stories high. It has been incredibly controversial, maybe more so than it should be. The world's not coming to an end if it goes up. It's not an awful, terrible thing. It's not going to destroy the neighborhood. But there have been, in my opinion, some really, really ridiculous statements made by the developers, some ridiculous statements made by the housing authority, some ridiculous statements made by those fighting it, truly ridiculous statements made by the Yale attorney who was helping them, all kinds of allegations of racism, all kinds of nonsense, just a ton of misinformation from everybody. And the project, as I saw it, doesn't make sense, but primarily because the affordable housing law doesn't make much sense. So if you're just learning about this now or just following this now, here's the project. Down in Indian Neck in Brantford, just before you get to Sliney Fields, is a development called Parkside. It was traditionally done as a senior living facility, and over time it's become a senior living facility, and also a mental, those with mental disabilities also live there, that can still live on their own. The housing authority decided, rightfully so, that something had to be done. These were out-of-date units. They were not compliant with disability laws, housing laws. They're also just tiny. Certainly something had to be done. Parkside, Beacon came in, made a deal. Apparently, they sent out bids for companies to do this. It seemed in the bag, based on what I've seen, that Beacon was going to get this no matter what. The head of Beacon used to work for the state doing this, so kind of an inside thing going on there. In any event, they made this application a couple times to planning and zoning. We're not using something called 830G. 830G is a state law we basically refer to as the affordable housing law. And what that law essentially does, and they will tell you it doesn't, but here's what it actually does. It allows you to circumvent most of the reasons a town could deny an application. So when you can say it doesn't fit the character, it doesn't fit traffic concerns, or it doesn't fit whatever, you cannot use those standard objections when opposing a project that comes in under 830G. The applicants initially did not come in under 830G. They came in under normal just to maximize their money. When that wasn't working, they said, let's get around these zoning requirements and let's come in there with an 830G application. They used the law as a weapon, no question about that. The town, they went forward. some approvals, but they were limited approvals. They fought those in court. They came back for more changes. There were more limited approvals. They fought those in court. And in court, they typically kept winning because court, at this point, it's housing court. It's geared towards affordable housing. That's the nature of this state. It is laws set up by Democrats. That's what they're pushing. That's what you have. The law is meant to be difficult for towns to fight this. That the purpose of the law is to make it hard for towns to fight projects like this. So you find projects that even if they're not affordable housing, you find a way to call them affordable housing so you get the advantages of this law. And that's what Beacon is. Beacon is a $100 million plus company out of Boston that has made a living and a lot of money for their investors making use of this law. And so they also end up with a bunch of nonprofit groups. Yale gets involved in saying, this law is helpful for people of minorities, and that if you don't support it, you're racist, and this is helping the lower classes. It's absurd because the law itself doesn't do any of that. What the law says is that if a town has less than its housing stock designated affordable housing, not actually affordable housing, but designated as affordable housing, then those laws can be circumvented. The problem in a town like Brantford is we are not allowed to count most of the units we have in town that are actually affordable housing. So affordable housing has a few components. They say it's under a certain amount of money. Then the component of there's a deed restriction, which means it's going to be locked in at that rate for years to come. We actually have units that are market value at that rate. So you don't need to have a deed restriction. They're always going to be at that rate. That's the market value. We're not allowed to count any of those units. We're not allowed to count any of the trailer parks, where Brantford has the highest concentration of trailer parks in the state. Not allowed to count them. So we're not allowed to count the housing inventory that we have. And so developers like Beacon then come in and say, okay, we can get property or take over other properties relatively inexpensively, get massive grants from the state to build it, and then make money in perpetuity. And that's what they did. And they have a law stacked against the town. So the town multiple times went to court to try to fight this. Multiple times went to say this isn't wrong. In fact, the last legal decision actually said that you can use property you don't own in your calculation for approval. It's nuts. This is a crazy law. It doesn't make sense. It does nothing. All the people saying it's about racism, it does nothing to end racism. It does nothing to take New Haven people and put them in the suburbs for one reason. When the application comes in, where you're coming from doesn't matter. You cannot legally say I'm only taking people from New Haven or from Madison or from North Haven. You can't do it. So the purpose, the support that people have for this law is dumb. It makes no sense. But there's another major reason the law is ridiculous. And we have in this decision, this funding for Parkside, every complaint people have about the wastefulness of government happens here. It's a perfect example of how government just throws money away. Here's what Beacon got. This company, $100 million plus company, go to their website, big investors, they're massive. Up and down the East Coast, they own properties. Their press release said they got a $1.8 million grant from the state, from SHAFA, on federal taxing credits. Now, tax credits are not dollars. What they do is they allow you to have those tax credits, and you sell those tax credits to a company. So let's say company A, Bank of America or JP Morgan or something along those lines. They sell them these tax credits. They will pay 90 to 91% for those tax credits. So the tax credits are $1.8 million. That corporation will give Beacon 1.65 million, 90% of it about that, to build their project. But what the press release doesn't say is it's a 10-year tax credit plan. So it's not 1.8 million. It's 18 million. So in exchange for 18 million, a company or corporation will give Beacon 90% of that, or 91% of that, in that ballpark. It varies based on a bunch of different figures. So basically, Beacon will get $16.6 million to build this. In their estimates, they put the estimate at this project at about $22 to $23 million. That being said, the taxpayers are funding in tax credits, in money that instead of getting in tax revenue, they can write off $18 million. There are 67 units going here, 60 of which are affordable housing. That's $300,000 a unit taxpayers are paying for. Now, here's the problem with that. We have fairly large developers in Brantford, fairly large developers on the shoreline. The state could have gone to any developer, any solid, financially viable developer, and said, I'm going to give you $18 million. What can you build for me? Found property. And for the same amount of money, built at least 150 units. At least. It's not close. Instead, Beacon will be handed $16.5 million. The taxpayers will lose $18 million for 67 units, 7 of which will be at market rate. So 60 units of affordable housing. Our affordable housing stock, actual designated affordable housing stock, will go from the 50 that exists now to the 67, 17 units. It does nothing to add any significant amount of affordable housing to Brantford. Nothing. And in these hearings, you had Democrats, and I'm a Democrat, in this case, they're nuts, showing up over and over again. This is for the people. And if you oppose this, you're racist. And are you crazy? This is nuts. It's a massive waste of money, but it's exactly what, when people point to government about government waste, this is what they're talking about. You could have taken $18 million and built anything, found a lot anywhere, and it would have been perfect. 150 units easily. This is nowhere near the train station, not all sidewalks up and down the street, nowhere near a grocery store, nowhere near the things that people need who are going to live there, the lower income people who hopefully will live there, nowhere near those things. And all the information I've seen about affordable housing from the state and from the federal government, even information handed out by Jay Pottinger, the attorney from Yale who was pushing this project and called everybody else racist. It said it should be near grocery stores, should be near transportation lines, should be near bus lines. This is near none of those. So you're adding almost no affordable housing in an area that should never be affordable housing for $18 million paid for by the taxpayers in revenue they won't get in over the next 10 years. That is the definition of government waste. And a Boston company will come down, they will build this building, they will manage this building, they will reap profits forever, 100-year lease, because we got to pay $18 million for 67 units. You can't make this up. This is that $1 million hammer in the space shuttle kind of thing. It makes no sense. And don't trust me. Go to any developer. We have a ton of them in Brantford. There's a ton along the shorelines. If you're an elected official, if you're a state representative, these laws won't change because our state reps can't touch this. Robin Comey and Sean Scanlon and Christian Cohen can't touch it because if they want to pass something down the road, they need those New Haven reps. These New Haven reps, these Waterbury reps, these Hartford reps are married to this stupid, dumb law that does nothing. Nothing but waste money. It doesn't help segregate anybody. It doesn't put minorities in the suburbs. It can't legally do that. It does nothing. And in this case, this is the worst of the worst because it's not even adding affordable housing units. It's not helping us get closer to that 10%. The law doesn't allow us to count the vast majority of units we have in town that match the affordable housing law. It's absurd. Are they out of date? Sure. What should have happened? What should have happened is Beacon looked at other properties and built on a transportation line near services. Just like all the information Jay Pottinger handed out. Just like everything you read about affordable housing says. It should be on a transportation line near grocery stores and basic services that people can get to without having to drive. Instead, We gave $18 million for a shitty project that makes no sense. Beacon, the Boston, didn't even help a local company. Beacon's from Boston. We handed them cash. It's hard to put into words. At some point, I should write the book on how every step of the way this law and the decisions made by judges was absurd. Just absurd. The purpose, the reason the housing authority stepped up and said we had to do something, that was fine. Those units are out of date. There was no reason they were married to that location, except Beacon wanted that location. So at one point in the plan, there was a discussion about looking at other locations. They gave cursory this idea of here's 10 places we looked at. I called some of those property owners. They never heard from Beacon. They showed up and never called to find out if it was available. For example, the Richland property would have been perfect. There's a million places that this could have happened, and it didn't. This is why people talk badly about government. This is why people talk badly about Democrats. This is a Democratic law, and it's stupid. It makes no sense. Forcing towns to not count their housing stock, and then having to give up zoning, their own rights. This Beacon came in without affordable housing laws. They came in, applied twice, got denied, and said, okay, let's use this law and circumvent local zoning. It's exactly what they did. And there's nothing saying there's going to be more minorities there. It is nonsense. It's absurd. And the people behind it are the nonprofits. Yale Law School. A bunch of nonprofits saying, oh, affordable housing, affordable housing. That room was packed. They all had stickers on, pro Parkside, from the local DTC, the Democratic Town Committee at the meeting. And I spoke to a few of them afterwards, and once they found out what the project was, they were like, wait, we had no idea. Yeah, you had no idea. They blindly got behind this, supported this nonsense. And $18 million in taxpayer money is now gone to a project that does nothing to make Brantford better, does nothing to get those residents near services, near transportation lines, nothing. And I'll give, Cosgrove credit. He did everything he could to fight it. The town attorney did what they could to fight it. They went through every legal ramification they could do. At the end of the day, this law is ridiculous. It just ties your hands. It says you cannot make changes to this. We have the right to come in and circumvent local zoning laws. We're only going to count what we decide to count, even if you have. Brantford is not a rich town. Condo Central, tons of condos, some very low-end condos. There are apartments that are not $2,000, $3,000 a month. Plenty of apartments. Motorhomes. It's interesting. They passed a law a couple years back, and Lonnie Reed's, I believe her last year, Milford was going through this too, and they weren't allowed to count their mobile homes. So they passed a law that was basically incredibly specific to just Milford, in that particular Ryder Park in Milford. And what they said was, we can count mobile homes, trailer parks, if the property is owner occupied. The problem with that is almost no trailer parks are owner occupied. The land, the owner owns the trailer, but not the land underneath. In Ryder Park, they own the land underneath. So that helped one trailer park in Milford. But a town like Brantford, with the highest concentration of trailer parks in the state, it didn't help us. So we can't count them. What's amazing about units that are at market rate is, let's suppose the affordable housing rate says that the rent has to be $1,000 a month. There are many other rents that are market rate, not deed restricted, at $1,000 a month in that ballpark in Brantford. Plenty of them. No question about it. They're not going to change significantly, barring a Beverly Hillbilly situation where oil is struck in the backyard. A rent is not going to go from $1,000 to $2,000. It's going to stay in that ballpark. The reason you put a deed restriction on something is to make sure that number doesn't jack. You can't be in there for $800 a month and suddenly landlords say, oh, you know what, screw it, I want to charge $2,000 and force people out. So you don't want that to happen. But that's not going to happen when you have a market rate unit. Apartments don't suddenly go from $800 to $2,000, barring striking gold or striking oil. The whole law makes no sense. It's been in place for years now, Yet people are still complaining about racism and segregation issues in housing. So clearly the law doesn't work. And what they want to do is say, wait a minute, we want to now allow New Haven inner city housing authorities to push affordable housing and control local zoning outside in a 10 or 15 mile, 25 mile radius, whatever it is, from New Haven. They want more control of zoning. And those are laws that are being passed. And now all those laws being proposed, racism. We're doing it for racism. If you're not supporting this, you're racist. Jay Pottinger, the attorney from Yale, stood in that meeting and called the neighborhood racist. Jay Pottinger, whose family was raised in Pine Orchard, the wealthiest district in town, called everybody else racist. It makes no sense. And I sat here thinking, over the weekend, and I said, can you even go to the, so I imagine in East Haven, Joe Zullo, a Republican, would be against this law, and he would fight against it if they had the majority. And we'll have Vin Candelora on later in the week. We'll talk to him about this. But if I was Robin Comey or Christine Cohen or Sean Scanlon, and I represented the Shoreline as a Democrat, would I even try to put forth a law to change this? The answer is no. Because if I try to put forth a law to change this, I piss off all those inner city Democrat reps. And when Robin Comey goes to put forth a law on EpiPens or food allergies or education, which is her focus, or Christine Cohen puts up something environmentally friendly, or Scanlon was looking for support on his child tax credits, or what have you, the things that they're pushing, they could lose support from those cities. So does it make sense to put forth a law that would hurt another area that you're trying to work on? No, it wouldn't. Politically, it makes no sense. I can't be critical of them for that. At the same time, I can't say just vote for Republicans, because Republicans are not going to have a majority in the House anytime soon. And I can't imagine they're going to have a majority in the House and Senate anytime soon to pass something that would reduce these affordable housing laws. They don't make sense. Now, here's what could make sense. They gave out $1.8 million this year in tax credits, and that's $18 million over the next 10 years. What if the state or CHFA instead came to towns and said, listen, we'd like you to apply for grants, and on your own, propose locations for affordable housing? Why wouldn't that work? Why wouldn't it work if, instead of going to developers outside, coming in for laws and saying, we're going to circumvent these laws and we're going to make abuse this affordable housing law, why can't the state say, all right, we're going to set aside this amount of money, or the federal government, this amount of money for grants for affordable housing, and we're going to let towns competitively go after those grants? They could create a committee to design housing that works, a number of units that works on a main transportation line with property they may own or acquire. They can put it out to bid, and they can see what they can get for $18 million, as opposed to having Beacon come in and get $18 million to put up 67 units where there were 50, 7 of which will be at market rate. Doesn't that make more sense? Instead of allowing a Boston-based developer to come in, take over a housing authority locally, which, by the way, only handles one project. The Branford Housing Authority, which is a state entity, only handles Parkside. No other affordable housing in town do they handle. It's just Parkside. For years, no one gave a shit who was on that committee. It was just a nothing committee. Nothing. And then suddenly became crazy because the neighbors went crazy. Now, I'm going to say this. The neighbors were not always reasonable. They were not always amenable to logical, intelligent conversation. To this day, they're still interrupting meetings and being disruptive. It's not pleasant. That's not the way you should go about anything. And sometimes you don't get your way. This law is bad. It's a terrible law. The town did everything they could to fight this. Every legal thing they can do, they went after. They did the best they could. And that's because, quite frankly, Richard just kind of said this. You have an administration that realizes this is a crazy law. If you had a Democratic administration, they never would have fought anything. And they probably would have passed planning and zoning. So they fought, but there was nothing you can do because you're fighting with one, and at least one, if not two hands behind your back. The law sucks. Somebody's comments, if you get enough Republicans in towns like Brantford to neutralize the Dems in the inner cities, you can't. It's just not going to happen. You're saying from a legislature standpoint, remember, New Haven has a bunch of reps. Waterbury has a bunch of reps. You'll never get enough from these towns to do that. And many of these towns are left. Listen, Brantford is not necessarily a Republican town. Jamie Cosgrove wins because he's a very logical person. People know him personally. But it's not. There's far more Democrats than Republicans from a registration standpoint. So that really wouldn't happen. Volker, if they get to it, they will look out for their interest groups as well. Yeah, that's, of course. It'd be nice if we were a bipartisan state. We're not a bipartisan state. And listen, I'm not sitting here saying, whether you're Democrat or Republican, I traditionally vote Democrat. In the last election, I endorsed all of the Democrats for a reason. And we've talked about why in those different races. But I think their hands are tied too. They have agendas and things they want to push through too. Robin Comey is focused on education and food allergies, right? That's been her thing. So if she's looking to get some of those things passed, there's some horse trading that happens. And not jumping on the turf of the inner city Democrats is probably part of that. Otherwise, you get nothing done. Sean has he's the head of bonding now, and he has a tax credit program. We'll talk about that tax credit program because I feel a little differently than he does on some aspects of it. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'd rather see more money go towards the lower income people, and I would rather see income focused on care for kids. I believe we need to revise how we fund childcare for people that desperately need it and allow them to get to work. I'm for laws that help people get to work. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But this is the world coming to an end? No. Will the project look more attractive than what we have there? Almost certainly. Does it make sense? No. Those who fought it, okay, that's fine. Someone just said, just because a particular law sucks doesn't mean it's a microcosm. It's not the law that's a microcosm. It's the spending that's the microcosm. It's not the law. The law is a left law, no question about it. And I understand the idea. Initially, when we talked about affordable housing, it was having people who make less money who work in that town to be able to live there. So the idea that a police officer who was starting off at $50,000 couldn't live in Greenwich because there's nothing they could live on at $50,000. That made sense to me, right? You want to be able to, there is a sense of community that happens when you have teachers and firemen and police officers able to live in that town. What has become with that, but the law never made sense. If you can't count the housing unless it's deed restriction, it doesn't make sense. It's a nonsense law. The microcosm that I was talking about wasn't that law. The microcosm was of government spending. And I'm not pretending for a second it's just Democrats that spend stupidly. Now, let's look at history. Republicans have spent, especially on a national level, just as crazily as Democrats have. Everybody loves spending. Christopher, affordable housing is important. The way it's done is nonsense. 100% agree. 100% agree. The problem is this. Affordable housing exists. Brantford has affordable housing. I'm in an apartment. The people that live around me, not millionaires. I don't live in Pine Orchard. Certainly don't live in Greenwich. We have a lot of police officers and teachers and people who make middle-class money in Brantford. Our condos, many of which are, now we've seen an uptick in the last year because of COVID and New York people pouring in. But in general, there were condos you can get for $130, $140. What is that monthly rent? There are other ways to go about this which actually solve the problem. But the microcosm is this. If you're going to take $18 million, we at least have to have the mentality that we want to get as much as we can for our $18 million. But we have to have the mentality that we want value. We want to get as much as possible for our money. We do that in our personal lives. We search for value when we do our personal budgets. But our laws are set up that throw value out the window. And then we have laws like prevailing wage that force things that you cannot get bids from people who are non-union or what have you, and it forces them even higher. We can go to a developer with $18 million and say, can we find a place on Route 1, on a bus route, near stores, with sidewalks? How many units can we get? It'll be far more than 60. Instead, we have to pay for demolition and rebuilding this, temporary housing for the current use people who live there, get them back in there. And they're promising all those people will have a place. I don't know if I buy that, but they're promising that. The microcosm is how we throw money away. Conversely, we have a town like Brantford that has somehow managed to have its mill rate stay under 30 while building a new school, while building a new senior center, community house, while improving on its infrastructure. What's the difference? Value. We make decisions where we get the most for our money. If we had said, we're funding $18 million for this project, let's put it out to bid, let's see what the local developers can do, we'd have a very, very different story. But you're putting now affordable housing in an area where affordable housing experts tell us it shouldn't be. Affordable housing experts are telling us on a transportation line, with sidewalks, near services. This is not on a transportation line, not all sidewalks, not near services. So first, it's a terrible location. Two, it's $18 million for 67 units, when it should be at least twice that. The microcosm is in how government wastes money. Not all branches of government, but that's the microcosm. Republicans do it too. In this case, this happens to be a very left law. And you have a core group of Democrats in inner cities that are pushing this law as a solution for housing issues and a solution for racism and segregation in housing. You have other Democrats who may not agree with that, but they can't speak up because they have their agendas. And the Republicans are very much the minority, and they're not going to get anything done. So towns like Brantford and Milford and Madison are stuck with their hands tied as local zoning decisions are taken from them. It's a bad law. Even worse, it's not actually helping anybody. Nobody is better off because of the 830G. Nobody is better off because of that law. And it cost $18 million for this project. By the way, there were 5 or 6 other projects in the state awarded at the same time. I can give you those numbers. Westbrook Village Phase 4 in Hartford, $1.3 million, again times 10, so $13 million over 10 years. Crescent Crossings, $2 million, so $20 million. McConaughey Terrace in New Haven. If you're looking for an example of this, here are the affordable housing projects that were approved. We're talking about getting people, desegregating and sending them to the suburbs. Here are the projects that were approved. Hartford, Brantford, Bridgeport, New Haven, Orange, Newington, New Haven, Waterbury. So take out of the 10 projects that were approved for about $146 million in tax credits. New Haven, Waterbury, New Haven, Bridgeport, Hartford. You're going to tell me this law is about desegregation of the suburbs? What planet? $146 million. They're all yelling about racism, and you just put 90% of the 80% of the money back into the inner cities. Give me a break. That's the list. The award list for low-income housing credits this year. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It's just crazy. All right, we'll get to the NCAA equality stuff tomorrow. I think it's an interesting discussion on revenue and how do you go about that on the NCAA level versus professional level. And we'll also get to that child tax credit issue that Scanlon talked about last year. I'm going to aim to have Ken and Laura on Wednesday or Thursday. I'll let you know tomorrow on that. And then next week, we'll try to have one of the other Democrats representing us, representing the shoreline on as well. So, guys, thank you very much. Hope you enjoy a great night. The sun is out. I hope you get some exercise, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.